Everyone, it's Mr. Huffman, and this is going to be kind of our second lecture for the whole class, and it's concerning the Spanish and the Columbian exchange. So after we left off on the first one, which was naturally why Europe wanted to go to the, quote, New World in the first place, and that, while Portugal was an early innovator, Spain ended up being kind of the largest leader for the earliest part, really, of the 16th century, kind of from the 1500s to the 1600s. They were really the biggest dog on the kind of the curb, so to speak. So Spain is where we're going to be kind of talking about first as far as the big, large colonial powers. But we're going to see that England, who we're going to be the kind of successor of in terms of our own kind of colonies here in the United States, what will become the United States, England's going to kind of eventually take a larger role. But for now, Spain is going to be the biggest one. And in particular, the Columbian exchange. And the Columbian exchange, we're going to find, is going to be the method through which Spain greatly extracted a lot of wealth and a lot of resources from North America and South American colonies to help and benefit them all the way all across the sea. Okay, so pre-Columbian Native American Empire. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I think it's later in this week, you'll see another Ed puzzle about this, about how really we need to kind of think about Native Americans in terms that normally we're used to thinking of them. But rest assured, even now, I can go ahead and tell you that pre-Columbian Native American empires were pretty vast. It's easy to say these were uncivilized people or that they weren't as advanced as the Spanish or the Europeans. But in reality, they had fairly sizable empires themselves. You can see here kind of in modern-day Mexico, the Aztecs, as well as the Mayans, and then the Incas all the way here in South America. So you can see they had pretty sizable, vast empires in their own right. And here are some of the ruins as well that are very beautiful. Kind of, you can travel to Central America to see these for yourselves. I've actually been to Cozumel, Mexico, and seen some of the Aztec ruins there. It's pretty fascinating, great stuff. So the Aztecs. Now the Aztecs, they're going to be led by Montezuma, and their major city is going to be Tenochtitlan. Okay, and Tenochtitlan is going to basically be the capital city for the Aztecs. That we're going to see it was a pretty big city, over 200,000 residents, which, that's a pretty good size for a city now, especially large if you're talking in the 1400s, 1500s, right? So Aztecs focused mostly in Tenochtitlan, which, as it turns out, is actually modern-day Mexico City. So Mexico City now is, believe it or not, is the largest city in the world in terms of population size. I believe Mexico City approaches somewhere like 20 million people, which is pretty massive right now, largest city in the world. So in its own way, back then, before the Spanish had even arrived, 200,000 people lived in Tenochtitlan, that capital of the Aztec empires. And one reason that this was able to kind of be as large as it was, they had a very elaborate system of canals that was, really facilitated water being brought in and also kind of any waste or sewage to be taken out. So they really had an elaborate system of canals and tunnels that would really put the best, cities in Europe at the time to shame. London, Paris, Madrid, whatever city you want to select there. Okay. Now the Spanish, once they arrive here in modern-day Mexico in the Aztec Empire, are going to be led by Hernan Cortez. Now, Cortez's men are going to be only 550, okay? So Cortez himself is going to be vastly outnumbered, right? We're talking over 200,000 residents alone in this capital city of Tenochtitlan, right? So lots of people are living there in the Aztec Empire, in Tenochtitlan. Meanwhile, when Cortez arrives, only 550 men, so he's going to be pretty vastly outnumbered, okay? And I'll just leave that here just for a second. So we're going to see here, again, as I said in the kind of earlier slide, we can see how massive these empires are. Lots and lots of people lived here. Meanwhile, 550 people on the Spanish are coming over. They're going to be vastly outnumbered, but they're going to have a few things on their side, some of which they're aware of, some of which they're not as aware of, okay? So 1519 to 1520 is really when Cortez and Montezuma, who's leading the Aztecs, are going to go at it. So Montezuma is actually going to be taken hostage by Cortez and by the Spanish, okay? And they're going to say, okay, listen, we'll give you Montezuma back if you remove your Aztec statues and replace them with Christian ones, right? That you replace them with maybe the Virgin Mary or of crucifixes, crosses, right? So naturally, the Aztec priests, who kind of were versed in the Aztec religion, very much angry about this. They organized their own revolt, and a battle's going to rage for days. That's going to actually kill 450 out of that 550 Spanish, right? So that's, about 80% of the Spanish are going to die in the course of that the battles there, while 4,000 Aztecs are killed, including Montezuma himself, right? So we're going to see, wow, 450 Spanish are killed, but 4,000 Aztecs are killed. Now, why is that? Well, it's kind of blocking this here. For one thing, they had superior weapons, but on a larger level, then again, the weapons and warfare is going to play a big role as far as why so many Aztecs were killed. But my face is kind of blocking it here. A smallpox eruption, a smallpox epidemic and pandemic, kind of words familiar to us right now, right? But a smallpox epidemic and a smallpox eruption is going to actually kill many more of those Aztecs than the Spanish, right? And what happens here is, again, a lot more Spanish are bringing over these European diseases that they had long been inoculated to, that they had had immunity towards. But these, Aztecs and these Native American peoples, they had not yet experienced these at all. So they're experiencing these diseases and these eruptions for the first time, and that's going to kill even more of those Aztecs naturally than the Spanish. So most of the Spanish are going to die that had came over, but at the same time, even more Aztecs are dying. Now, again, sure, they were fighting in kind of hand-to-hand combat, swords, and also through gunpowder, European gunpowder. And so those did kill lots of Aztecs. However, it's going to actually be more smallpox than anything else. Okay, and this just shows you kind of here's the Spanish over here to the right, and the massive kind of empire of Aztecs they're fighting against. So pretty scary stuff both ways around there, right? So what's the aftermath of this? Well, Cortez, he actually kind of hightails it out of there, set sail all the way back for Europe, and returns with reinforcements, many more than 400. That 550 is going to be several thousands worth of men and reinforcements, and they're going to kind of lay waste to Tenochtitlan, okay? So Tenochtitlan's destroyed. That capital city of the Aztec Empire is destroyed. And on its ashes, Mexico City is going to be built, okay? And really all of this is going to be hopefully easy for you to remember. All of the Spanish territories now that are going to be in North and South America are going to be collectively known as, New Spain, okay? So Mexico City is built on top of Tenochtitlan, and that eventually, becomes modern-day Mexico City many years later. And Mexico City is going to serve as the capital, again, for New Spain. So the Spanish are slowly kind of taking over large parts of Mexico, even parts of the future United States, and going further south as well. Okay, so Francisco Pizarro and the Incas the Incas themselves are going to be Peru. Now, Pizarro himself is going to be of Spanish descent, fighting the Incas. Yet again, the same thing happens where Pizarro has superior weapons and those outbreaks of diseases, which the Europeans were starting to have a better understanding of how that was infecting these Native American populations. But they saw themselves as, the armor of God is on us and that God himself is killing off these peoples, when in actuality, it was actually these diseases that was doing the job. Okay, so Pizarro, he takes out a lot of the Incas, which are in mostly modern-day Peru, which, again, superior weapons and those outbreaks of diseases, again, really going to go a long way into taking all and plundering the wealth of the Incan Empire, okay? So, again, the Mayans as well are going to fall prey to European diseases and weapons. So I'm going to keep emphasizing this. Sure, weapons really did the job in terms of, unfortunately, killing off a lot of these Native American and indigenous peoples. However, it was diseases that actually did it more than anything else. And as I said, a lot of these Spanish and these people of Europe thought it was the armor of God, or that God was protecting them and fulfilling their will to take over these places. Not exactly true in actuality. It was mostly actually these biological diseases. Okay, so pretty quickly, Spain again, Columbus had came over those years before, even though he was Italian, under the Spanish flag, had came over, and very quickly this whole new Spain was being built, where Spain was really the kind of foremost leader of those North and South American colonies. Okay, so what really was New Spain like to live in? Well, really, the three G's. These G's I really want you to remember. Three G's that really sum up ultimately the Spanish kind of ideas of what colonization were, but certainly when the French, which I'm going to mention here in a little bit, and the English as well, when they start to come over, are really going to govern what they're looking for. Three G's should be easy to remember: God, gold, and glory. Now, the official reason they were saying why we're coming to these people is we need to kind of Christianize and be missionaries to these indigenous peoples that don't know about our version of God or Jesus Christ, right? That we need to come over and kind of civilize these people, right? That's what they're saying on paper. What they were really looking for, though, was gold, okay? So gold was really rumors of gold, this lost city of El Dorado, that there's always gold somewhere beyond, just out of our sight. The idea that gold is here and that we can take as much gold as possible from the New World was another, really the biggest motivating factor. Okay, now as it turns out, not a lot of gold is going to be found in this, quote, New World, right? That North and South America, lots of gold is going to be looked for. There's going to be some that's found, more silver than anything else than gold. But as it turns out, not a lot of gold are going to be in the Americas, okay? But again, this isn't just the Spanish who are really going after this. This is going to be the French and certainly the English as well when we get to them, all right? So God, gold, and glory, okay? The three biggest things. And glory, what that represents is, for lots of these conquistadors, which is Spanish for conquerors throughout New Spain, they're going to be those who basically say, okay, maybe I don't have a lot going on here in Spain or in Europe, but hey, lots of exciting stuff's happening in the Americas. Maybe I can hop a boat and go to the Americas, and I can kind of be, remake my life, restart it, become a man of glory, a man of honor. Okay, so that really was a good tool for recruiting. Certainly these conquistadors, who again were Spanish conquerors, kind of the Spanish soldiers that are going to travel throughout and kind of facilitate the rulings of New Spain. Okay, so again, God, they were saying we're coming here to Christianize these people. Gold was really the reason they were there more than anything. But then glory, again, if you didn't have a lot of stuff going for you in Spain and in Europe, then you can come over and, remake your life, really become something that you weren't there. So conquistadors really were that. Now, this whole system of encomienda is also going to be important. And what encomienda is, Cortez established this, where essentially he gave authorities to the men under him, or his kind of minions or the lieutenants under him, who were going to be commissioners of a province. So let's just say you came over and you were a friend of Cortez, or even a friend of a friend's of Cortez's. You kind of had the lay of the land, and kind of this system's established by which you get to oversee and rule New Spain, which is, again, if you're in that position, is a very exciting thing. But as you can maybe imagine, the people who are actually having to work and having to really, make their whole being forced to work and trying to find this gold or trying to find these resources, or are, hopefully, as you could expect, going to be these Native American peoples. These Native American peoples who weren't killed off, or either by disease or by war or by famine, are suddenly going to find themselves enslaved. Okay, so these kind of Native Americans who weren't on the winning side, now all of a sudden are in this system of encomienda, whereby which, again, Cortez and his friends of friends, they're the ones ruling over everything. All the people actually working the land, unfortunately, are going to be these poor Native Americans who got stuck in these positions, who are having to work because they're being forced to, basically a gun put to their head. Okay, so it's great if you're Cortez or Cortez's friends, you get to do whatever you want here, right? Excuse me, this whole world's set up for you to succeed, for you to do great. Everyone else, tough luck, though. Okay, so tough stuff for you if you're enslaved, essentially, as these Native American peoples. Now, African slaves are not really quite being brought over just yet. That's going to be something that more English colonies do. We'll get to that later. but it is going to be a form of slavery on the part of these poor Native American and indigenous peoples. And so here's another picture. The Spanish conquistador is going to really be this kind of vocal image, important image to show this is what rulers look like here in New Spain, right? These Spanish conquistadors looking for God, gold, and glory. They're the ones really ruling the day. Meanwhile, you have these indigenous people that are kind of unfortunately acting as the slaves to these conquistadors in New Spain. Okay. So, settlement. So, again, the biggest part of that God part, where the Spanish are beginning conquering northern Mexico and even, again, venturing into the American Southwest and modern day Florida at the time, St. Augustine is going to become the very first European town established in what would become the United States. So, the Spanish were the ones ruling St. Augustine and that part of what will become the United States. Okay, again, the first permanent European town in what will become the U.S. I've actually been to St. Augustine some years ago. Beautiful city. They still got a lot of their history preserved of when Spain were the ones ruling. Okay, so again, this is going to be a very important, impactful image because this is a Spanish mission. Okay, and what Spanish missions were essentially were basically churches that Spain set up all throughout New Spain, all throughout the Spanish Empire, as a way to kind of put their stamp down or put their foot down to say, hey, we're ruling this area. Everything comes through us. And especially everything comes through the church. So that goes back to that God, right? So everything's running through the church. Everything's running through us. And it was a kind of very vocal way to stamp that and put that there, right? So all these Spanish missions are popping up all around New Spain, all across the known kind of territories. And again, think of them almost as franchises, right? So think of McDonald's, how you see McDonald's kind of all across, you're going down a highway or across an interstate. That's almost what these missions serve, right? That they're kind of planting a flag to say, hey, listen, God is here, civilization is here, right? So the goal primarily at these missions were to convert Native Americans into Catholicism, which was the primary religion in Spain or in the Spanish Empire. So again, Catholic churches that popped up all around that were trying to say, hey, this is where we're converting these Native American peoples to Catholicism, and we're making sure that they follow our rules and our way of life. Okay, so Spanish missions, very key in terms of determining all of that. Okay, but it's not just Spain that's really kind of cropping up in these territories. France is starting to see, okay, we hear a lot of interesting stuff that's happening with Spain in the New World. We certainly want to get on the action as well. Okay, so if Spain, or that is France, very anxious to compete with Spain. Okay, naturally they're both two massive nations in Europe. They're both pretty powerful. If Spain's doing better, France is getting nervous and saying, all right, we need to up our game as well. Okay, so in 1602, King Henry IV, and you're not going to have to really remember his name, but King Henry IV is going to authorize French merchants to say, okay, see what you can do about establishing our own colonies in the Americas, okay? Samuel de Champlain, he's going to be hired as the leader of New France, okay? So Samuel de Champlain, he's sent out as the leader to say, all right, what can you get for us, de Champlain, in the Americas? And here's a picture of him here, okay? So in 1608, Champlain is going to found Quebec, which is the capital of New France. So in the same way that Mexico City is the capital of New Spain, Quebec is going to be the capital of New France. Now, again, St. Augustine, Florida is going to be a Spanish city that is important, but it's, again, Mexico City that's the capital of New Spain. Meanwhile, in New France, Quebec, which is in Canada, is going to be the capital of New France, okay? The fur trade is going to be the biggest ways through which France is going to really amass its own empire here in the Americas, okay? So like Spain and like the future English colonies, they're going to try to look for gold, but they learn pretty quickly there's not a lot of gold to be found here in the New World. But what is here is lots of fur. And where does that come from? Lots of animals. So really a lot of hunting of animals and the extraction of and collecting of fur are going to be the biggest money makers in the New World for France. So fur trade, really how France makes a lot of its money here in the New World. Okay, so New Orleans is also going to serve as a kind of a key fort and a key point in New France. Okay, so it's kind of blocking what I'm saying here. You can see this in classroom if you want to look at that as well separately. But in this 10-year period, from about 1673 to 1682, French explorers are going to kind of, starting in Canada, find what we'll later deem the Mississippi River and kind of go all the way down, start making maps of the Mississippi River, start saying, okay, here are some territories that we need to maybe make note of or we can maybe make money in, end up going all the way down the Mississippi River and find themselves kind of at the port of New Orleans. And so New Orleans in modern-day Louisiana is going to be yet another key fort and point. Okay, so again, Quebec is the capital of New France, but New Orleans is going to be another massive important city. And I've never been to New Orleans personally. Maybe you have, but I know even to this day, New Orleans has a huge, massive kind of French presence, and a lot of people speak French in New Orleans, and it still has a kind of a rich French cultural history. Okay, so again, the French kind of start in Canada, work their way down the Mississippi River, and establish that port of New Orleans. Okay, so these old and new worlds are going to collide, right? And the biggest term that I want you to remember in terms of how this old and new world collide is going to be the Columbian Exchange. And that name comes in part from Christopher Columbus himself. So, and he's been dead by this point, really, when this term takes off. But Columbian Exchange, what is that? Well, kind of the textbook definition, the cultural and biological exchanges naturally between the old and new world. So back and forth, plants, animals, diseases even, and certainly technologies are going to transform not only Native Americans' ways of life and how life is lived in the Americas, but naturally also Europeans, right? Europeans are getting certain things that they never received before, certain new foods and animals. And by the same token, Native Americans and these colonial settlers who are coming over and living in the Americas, they're getting things from Europe that they had maybe never seen before, right? So stuff is going back and forth, okay? Human capital as well, though, okay? And when I say human capital, that can be either indentured servants or slaves as well. So there's going to start to be slaves that come back and forth, but not even just slaves, also indentured servants. Where indentured servants were essentially slaves, but with a contract, right? They were kind of a version of a slave or a servant for anywhere between 6 to 7 years. And at the end of that time, they could either purchase their freedom or be set free by whoever their debtor was or their master was. Okay, so again, slaves are going to start to be traded back and forth in this time as well. Okay, so the Spanish mostly used Native American peoples as their slaves. France, somewhat more indentured servants, but when we get to English colonies, which again we're going to be coming out of, okay, we do have some indentured servants, but also the beginning of slave importation, which I'll talk about later. Okay, so again, here's a map of that Columbian Exchange. Again, lots of big things here, right? Beans, chocolate, corn, peanuts, pineapples, potatoes, pumpkins, squash, sweet potatoes, tobacco, tomatoes, turkeys, all things that had never been in Europe before, all of a sudden are being found in the New World and shipped back across to Europe. Okay, so all these new things Europeans had never really seen or experienced before, all these foods and spices, and in some cases animals, going all the way across. By the same token, lots of things that were in Europe had never been to the Americas before, right? So bananas, cattle, chickens, citrus fruits, coffee beans, grapes, horses, onions, peaches, pigs, rice, sugarcane, wheat. That's all stuff that had been native to Europe or had been brought to Europe some years before. Now that's all going back across. So this Columbian Exchange, hopefully you're seeing, was greatly beneficial for both sides, right? It's greatly beneficial for those settling in the Americas and helpful for all those in Europe. Okay, so that does it for today's stuff. So hopefully you have a better understanding of the Columbian Exchange and have this kind of growing French and Spanish empires. But the English are not going to be too far behind. And considering I'm speaking in English right now, that should give you an indication. England, as it turns out, is really going to be, they kind of start out behind, but they're going to end up being kind of one of the key dominating nations when it comes to colonizing and exploring the Americas and the quote New World. So this is Mr. Huffman signing off. Hope everything's going great for you. And as always, if you have any questions about anything, please reach out to me and I'll help you out in any way I can. But take care.